If a simply dressed woman walked into the most prestigious auction house in Paris, no fame, no social media, no entourage of bodyguards, who would you think she was? A server, a lost guest, or perhaps someone who simply didn't belong? In a room bathed in crystal light, where paintings are priced like fortunes and silent handshakes are worth millions of euros, her presence felt like static interrupting a symphony. People scoffed, people glanced and looked away. No one knew she hadn't come to make noise. She had come to reclaim a truth that very room had once refused to acknowledge. And just minutes later, when she raised her paddle and bid 100 million euros on a painting no one had even bothered to glance at, the Parisian elite finally realized they hadn't just misjudged a woman, they had underestimated an entire life, a life that had quietly protected something too pure for them to ever truly understand. Paris, an early winter afternoon. The rooftop of Sotheby's shimmered like a crystal box above Faubourg Saint-Honoré. Every name on the guest list had arrived: the director of the Louvre, the Rothschild family's art advisor, the chief curator of MoMA. Dark tuxedos and metallic couture gowns wove together like a silent symphony of power, wealth, and legacy. And then a woman stepped in quietly. No assistant, no name tag, no perfume. No one knew who she was. Her grey wool coat was frayed at the cuffs. A coarse canvas bag hung from her shoulder, the straps sagging from time. Her leather flats were worn unpolished, and her eyes were calm, yet seeking nothing from this room. People looked at her as if she were a glitch in an otherwise flawless performance. A receptionist approached, polite but visibly uneasy. "Madame, are you sure you're at the right event?" The woman nodded, opened an old leather wallet, and produced a letter of confirmation. Not from an agency, but signed directly by the director of Sotheby's under the section labeled Independent Observer. No one said another word, but from behind a faint, disdainful laugh broke the silence. Elodie Morel, an art influencer, live streaming the auction to over 3 million followers, leaned toward her companion and murmured just loud enough for a few nearby guests to hear. "Paris has its share of outdated looks, but I didn't know we were reviving the entire 1960s tonight." A few heads turned. No one laughed with her, but no one spoke up either. The woman didn't flinch. She kept walking as if every gaze had simply brushed past her without touching. No one knew her name. No one knew she was the only person in that room who had once been painted by an artist with everything he had to give. The main hall unfolded like a shrine to art. The paintings were arranged in meticulous sequence, ascending in value from Bauhaus to postmodern impressionism, from 18th century Italian oils to a rare crackled bison ceramic vase from Japan. Gazes skimmed each work as if browsing a wine list, cold, technical, and perfectly on brand. In the last row, the woman looked at nothing. She pulled from her bag a leather-bound notebook, its edges worn thin. Her fingers turned the pages with ritual-like care. On the yellowed paper were slanted, even lines written in blue ink. Not everyone needs to understand, but if one person understands deeply, then the art is never forgotten. The handwriting belonged to Jean-Luc de Varenne, her late husband, a man once rejected by the very art world, now seated in this hall. Jean-Luc was not unknown. Quite the opposite, he had once come close to recognition. But then, he wrote a letter, declining a major gallery offer, refusing to reshape emotion to fit the market. And so the art world refused him in return. His name vanished from conferences, from exhibitions, even from the memories of those who had once promised to help him rise. Isabelle had kept everything. No arguments, no defenses. She simply persevered. On the large screen, the list of 20 official works began to appear. Each name carried a starting price equal to an apartment in central Paris. And then on line 18 appeared something strange. Untitled Work Montmartre, 1991. Oil on raw linen. Starting bid $12,000. No image, no listed artist, no description. A few people chuckled. Why include something with no provenance? But in the last row, Isabel quietly closed her eyes. She didn't need to look at the painting because she was the one who had wiped the dust from that canvas for 30 years. The lights in the hall dimmed as the 18th item was prepared for auction. On the giant screen, only one line appeared, untitled work. Montmartre, 1991. Some guests began to rise, taking the chance to slip out to the lounge. $12,000 for a painting with no name, no provenance, no certificate. In this world, that was a piece not worth discussing. But then, as two staff members carried it out, the old linen canvas, an oak frame smudged with faint fingerprints, colors faded into blue, like moonlight on a midnight sea, the room seemed to slow down. No one knew why they paused. Perhaps it was an unnamed emotion, or perhaps it was because the painting looked like nothing they had ever seen. The opening bid is $12,000. Would anyone like to begin? Silence. A hand went up from the last row. The paddle's painted edge was chipped like it had never been used before. Your bidding, Madame. The auctioneer tilted his head slightly. Isabel stood, unhurried eyes, not scanning the room. 100 million euros. The words were spoken in refined classical French. Not loud, not repeated, but they jolted the entire hall upright as if struck by lightning. The gavel in the auctioneer's hand froze mid-air. A journalist fumbled and dropped his pen. Elodie Morel spun around, certain she had misheard. Madame, please confirm. The auctioneer's voice cracked slightly. Isabel walked to the technical desk and laid down a folder. Inside was a notarized account verification from a French bank. Then she returned to her seat. She said nothing else. No one in that room could understand why a woman with no fame, no title, would willingly bid 100 million euros on a painting no one dared look at for more than 5 seconds. Only one person knew, and he had been buried beneath Montmartre for 32 years. After the words 100 million euros were confirmed, with an immediate transaction, the atmosphere in the hall turned strange. No one dared to say the word insane, but in every pair of eyes was the same unspoken question, who is she then? While the whispers still stirred the air, the woman stepped forward. No fuss, no hesitation. Just as someone who knew exactly where she needed to go and what was about to happen. Isabel de Varenne stopped in front of the operations desk. The technical staff looked at her uncertain. She smiled politely and placed a folder on the table. The paper inside had yellowed with time, but had been carefully preserved in transparent plastic sleeves. This is supplemental information for item 18, she said, her voice just loud enough to hear. An auction official took the folder and opened it. Inside, a pencil sketch, identical in every stroke to the painting just sold, except for the handwritten title, Claire de Lune, final version 1991. A letter written in blue ink, signed Jean-Luc de Varenne. A notarized certificate from Paris, dated 1992, stating that full ownership of all unpublished works by Jean-Luc belonged to his wife, Isabelle de Varenne. In that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The auction official's hands trembled as he looked toward the authentication panel. An older man nodded slowly. I know that name. We rejected him in 1991. Then the man, François Duval, director of Musée Garnier, rose slowly from the front row. His face had lost its usual confidence. Jean-Luc de Varenne submitted his portfolio to my museum. His work was deemed too emotional, lacking structure. And I was the one who wrote that critique. The words landed in the room like a glass shattering on marble. Isabel did not react. No sarcasm, no anger. She simply said, in a tone as steady as if she were reciting memory, "He once believed that if just one person truly listened, his work would not be forgotten. Today, I only wanted to make sure that was written differently." Then she returned to her seat, bringing nothing with her except the truth. The folder was passed to the team of art experts seated in a small room behind the stage. 3 individuals each, a respected voice in the European art world, bowed their heads over the documents as if reading a chapter of history that had once been torn out. One traced a finger along the pencil strokes of the sketch. Another shone ultraviolet light across the blue ink, the handwriting still heartbreakingly vivid. "If they don't want what I paint, then keep it. I paint because you believed in it, even when I no longer believed in myself." That letter wasn't written to a museum. It wasn't sent to an auction house. It was written for the only person who had ever looked at his paintings without the barrier of glass, the wife seated in the last row. After 10 tense minutes, one of the experts returned to the main hall. No microphone, no press statement. He simply spoke. "We confirm that the painting just auctioned is Claire de Lune, the final work by Jean-Luc de Varenne, fully authenticated, never before exhibited. The brushwork materials, sketch lines, and linen canvas all match the 1991 archive." The hall sank into a silence that had no name. It was no longer shocking, no longer ridicule. It was a shame. Those who had once dismissed him. Collectors who had declared that art must have the concept. Critics who had written that Jean-Luc painted for personal emotion, not the world. Now they were forced to acknowledge not just a work, but a man they had once refused to see. Isabel said nothing. She sat upright, both hands resting on her lap. No applause, no nod, no need for more words. Because the most important thing had already been proven. Not that she was right, but that her husband had not been wrong. Elodie, the woman who had mocked Isabel the moment she stepped into the auction, now sat silently in the front row. Her phone remained in live stream mode, but she said nothing. The face, once so comfortable before the camera, had gone rigid, as if she had stumbled into a painting she was never meant to be displayed in. On the giant screen behind the stage, the confirmation line still glowed brightly. Title: Claire de Lune, 1991. Author: Jean-Luc de Varenne. Status: final, unpublished work. Provenance: legally verified. No one in the hall spoke, but everyone could feel something shifting, like the gravity of the room had moved, drawn toward the woman in the last row, not because she spoke, but because she had never needed to. François Duval, the man who had rejected Jean-Luc 3 decades earlier, slowly rose to his feet. He removed the name badge from his chest and placed it on his seat. No one stopped him. No one asked why. That gesture needed no explanation. Nearby, a representative from the Albertina Museum leaned toward a colleague and whispered, "Contact the archives. Request a full review of all rejected submissions from 1988 to 1995. As for Elodie, the influencer known for her sharp takes on contemporary art, she remained motionless, eyes fixed on the screen, unable to meet anyone else's gaze. Because in the world she once ruled with curated commentary and judgmental glances, now it was the silence of others that reflected her most clearly. In the back, Isabel showed no triumph. She felt no glee, no visible emotion. She simply sat as before, upright, composed, as if she had always known the truth does not need to be defended. It only needs to be left untouched until the world grows quiet enough to hear it. Just minutes after the auction ended, the first images began surfacing across the private accounts of the art criticism world. Not photos of Elodie posing, not champagne, not couture, but a blurry frame, a woman in a grey coat seated in the last row behind the lights, behind every camera. Below the caption, only one line appeared: the woman who returned a painting to the memory of the world. Le Figaro Art republished the profile of Jean-Luc de Varenne for the first time in over 3 decades. The headline wasn't sensational. Just as graceful as the way he used to paint, he painted for one person. And now the whole world is watching. Major museums began revisiting their records of past rejections. Several independent galleries issued public apologies for once labeling Jean-Luc's art as too soft, not marketable. No one was calling for sainthood. No monuments were being erected. But emails, invitations, and articles began flooding into a small address in Montmartre, where Isabelle still lived in the same old house where Jean-Luc had once painted, in a room no larger than a dusty bookshelf. And then, as if inevitably, someone asked, "Will you hold an exhibition? Do you plan to sell more of his work?" Isabelle smiled as if they'd just asked the most innocent question in the world. "No, I only came to buy back what others once threw away." The hall at Sotheby's now stood empty, but the world outside had only just begun to move, not because a painting was beautiful, but because someone had quietly preserved it intact, patient, and without asking anyone's permission. Paris at dusk. The glass doors of Sotheby's closed behind Isabelle. There was no applause, no reporters, no one is rushing up to ask questions. Only the golden light spilling across the misted pavement and the sound of soft leather flats tapping against the stone like fingers gently knocking on a memory the world had nearly forgotten. She walked away, slowly, as if nothing had changed, but inside her old canvas bag, the same one she had carried from beginning to end, there were no more legal documents, no certificates of ownership. Instead, there was another sketch, a painting Jean-Luc had never finished. Just a single stroke of blue curving gently across a white canvas. No name, no title, no moonlight. Perhaps he never had time to add color, or perhaps he left that part for the one who had kept him alive for 32 years in silence. Back in the hall, those who remained no longer looked at the painting. They looked at each other. They looked at the empty chairs. They looked at the space that had just been filled by something absent from any valuation sheet dignity. A young curator murmured almost to herself, "I don't know why, but I keep thinking of my mother." Another director of a contemporary gallery tapped a finger against the folder and said quietly, "From now on, we need to ask more often, who kept the artwork and why?" And so Isabelle walked out of one of the most important auctions in Paris, not as the winner, but as the only one who made an entire system rewrite its definition of worth. She carried no title, but what she left behind could never be taken back. Her silence had changed the way the world understood a painting. Some people are born to be seen, and some only need to rise once for an entire system to bow its head. Today's story isn't just about a painting. It's about a woman whose name wasn't on the guest list, who had no profile on social media, who needed no validation except from the one who had believed in his brushstroke until his very last breath. Isabelle de Varenne didn't argue. She didn't win with words. She simply stayed patient, silent for 32 years to preserve something the world had convinced itself it had forgotten.